Zelophehad was an Israelite from the tribe of Manasseh, living during one of the most important periods in Israel's history. The Israelites had recently escaped slavery in Egypt, and after years of wandering in the wilderness, they were preparing to enter the Promised Land. As they journeyed, a census was taken to divide the land among the tribes and families. Zelophehad was counted among the people, but he died before reaching the Promised Land. Now, according to the customs of the time, only sons could inherit land from their fathers. But Zelophehad had no sons, only 5 daughters: Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. In this culture, it was considered normal for property to pass only through male heirs. This meant that without sons, Zelophehad's family would be left out of the inheritance, and his name would disappear from the records of Israel. The daughters of Zelophehad loved their father and respected his legacy. They didn't want their family to be forgotten just because there was no male heir. But this wasn't just about their father's name. It was also about their future. The land was more than just property. It was their connection to God's promises. It was their home, their livelihood, and their future in the Promised Land. Without it, they would be left with nothing. Imagine the feelings these 5 women must have had. They knew that the law of the time was clear: inheritance went to sons. But they also knew that it wasn't right for their family to be left out simply because they were daughters. They were faced with a choice: accept the situation or do something about it. These 5 sisters made a courageous decision. They decided to approach Moses, the leader of the entire nation of Israel, to plead their case. Now, Moses wasn't just any leader. He was the man who had spoken to God face to face. He was the one who had led their people out of Egypt and through the Red Sea. Approaching him with a personal request was no small matter. But the daughters of Zelophehad didn't stop there. They didn't just go to Moses, they also stood before Eleazar, the high priest, and all the tribal leaders at the entrance to the tabernacle, the holiest place in the camp. This was an incredibly public and formal setting. It took great courage for them to stand there and speak up. In front of all these leaders, they made their case. They said,
"Our father died in the wilderness, but he was not among those who rebelled against the Lord. He died for his own sin, but he left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan just because he had no sons? Give us property along with our relatives."
This was a bold request. These women weren't just asking for land, they were asking for a change in the system. They were challenging the idea that only sons could inherit property. In a culture where women were often left out of important decisions, their request was radical. Moses was a wise and humble leader, but even he didn't have an answer right away. He knew this was an important question, one that could have lasting consequences. So Moses did the right thing. He took their case to God. God's response was clear.
"The daughters of Zelophehad are right. You must give them their father's inheritance, and tell the Israelites that if a man dies without a son, his inheritance is to be passed to his daughters. If he has no daughter, give it to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give it to his father's brothers. And if his father had no brothers, give it to the nearest relative in his clan."
This was a groundbreaking moment. God didn't just answer the daughter's request, he changed the law for everyone. From that moment on, if a man died without sons, his daughters would inherit his property. This wasn't just a victory for the daughters of Zelophehad. It was a victory for all women in Israel. It was an affirmation that they had value and a place in the future of their people.
What can we learn from the daughters of Zelophehad? Their story teaches us about the power of courage, faith, and standing up for what is right. These women didn't let fear stop them from seeking justice. They saw an injustice, and they spoke up even when it was risky. Imagine how easy it would have been for them to stay silent. After all, the law was clear. Inheritance went to sons. What right did they have to challenge that? But the daughters of Zelophehad believed that their family deserved to be included, and they trusted that God would hear their plea. This kind of courage is something we all need in our lives. How many times do we see something that isn't right, but we stay silent because we're afraid of what others will think or how they will respond? There are still many places in the world where people face injustice, whether it's because of their gender, race, or social status. The daughters of Zelophehad remind us that when we stand up for what is right, we can make a difference, not just for ourselves but for others too. This might mean advocating for someone who is being treated unfairly at work. It might mean standing up against discrimination in our communities. It might even mean having the courage to address a personal situation where we feel marginalized or overlooked. Whatever the case may be, the lesson is clear. We can't let fear or tradition stop us from doing what is right. Another powerful lesson from this story is the way the daughters of Zelophehad trusted God with their challenge. They didn't know how Moses would respond when they approached him. They didn't know how the other leaders would react, but they trusted that God cared about justice and that He would guide the decision. In our own lives, we often face challenges where the outcome is uncertain. We might be dealing with an unfair situation at work or in our relationships. We might be struggling with a personal issue where we feel powerless. In those moments, it can be easy to give in to fear or doubt. But the story of the daughters of Zelophehad reminds us that God is always present and always listening. When we bring our challenges to Him in faith, He will guide us. It might not always be in the way we expect, but we can trust that God's justice will prevail. The impact of the daughters of Zelophehad didn't end with their own inheritance. Their courage had a ripple effect that changed the future for all women in Israel. Because of their boldness, future generations of women would have the right to inherit property if there were no male heirs. This was a monumental shift in the way society operated, and it all started because 5 women had the courage to speak up. This is a reminder that when we stand up for what is right, our actions can have far-reaching consequences. We might not always see the immediate impact of our decisions, but that doesn't mean they aren't significant. Just as the daughters of Zelophehad changed the course of history for women in Israel, our actions can make a difference for others, even in ways we might not anticipate. On a personal level, the story of the daughters of Zelophehad is also about the importance of taking initiative. These women didn't wait for someone else to solve their problem. They didn't complain or give up. Instead, they took matters into their own hands and sought justice for their family. In our own lives, we often face challenges where it's easy to feel helpless. But like the daughters of Zelophehad, we can take action. We can look for solutions, seek guidance from God, and take the steps needed to make things right. This story reminds us that God values initiative, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what is right. The daughters of Zelophehad left behind a legacy of courage, faith, and justice. Their story is more than just a historical account. It is a powerful reminder of what can happen when we have the courage to speak up and trust in God's guidance. These 5 women, living in a time when their voices were often unheard, changed history by standing up for their family and their future. Their actions demonstrate that true bravery lies not just in confronting authority, but also in believing that one's voice matters. Just as the daughters of Zelophehad were motivated by love for their father and their family's legacy, we too can be motivated by our values and convictions. In moments of uncertainty or fear, let us remember that God is always listening and ready to support those who seek justice. We can draw strength from their example to confront our own challenges and fight for those who may not have the ability or platform to speak for themselves. As we move forward in our lives, let us be inspired by the courage of Zelophehad's daughters to stand up for what is right and just, knowing that our voices can make a difference. As we do, we trust that when we step out in faith, we can be the change makers in our families, communities, and the world at large. In doing so, we not only honor their legacy, but also contribute to a future where everyone is valued and justice prevails for all. If this message has blessed and inspired you, make sure to subscribe to our Faith Reflections 24/7 channel and share it with others who need encouragement. God's mercy is available to all who seek Him. God bless you, and see you in the next video.